Hey, and welcome to our Discard. Today I'm going to talk about how to make things visually pop in your game room or game collection and create a little bit of visual interest with a few simple tips. Let's take a look. So the first way that I like to create a little bit of visual interest and a little bit of popping when it comes to visuals on any of my games or items is using lighting. Now when it comes to lighting, a lot of people in a lot of different collections will use LEDs on the back sides of different items. A lot of people will stick some LEDs to the backside of their television or the backside of their shelves. And I find this adds a tremendous amount of visual detail to that part of their game collection. I would definitely say when doing this, you want to make sure that the item that you're putting the LEDs on is far enough away from the wall that it really diffuses that light, so you have a really clean amount of light coming out over the back. Otherwise, you're going to end up with these kind of LED dots, which kind of creates this carnival-esque lighting, or the kind of lights that are on the floor in a movie theater. So if that's what you're looking for, that's the way to go, is just stick them right up against the wall. But personally, I really like just having that even colored light over the wall, and it just creates a lot of visual interest in that way. But there's a lot of other different ways that you can use lights to really make your collection pop as well. Now, another way that you can use lighting in your collection that can really make things pop is by adding figures or different items that actually light up on their own. A lot of these take batteries, so you should probably keep that in mind. I personally like using Pixel Pals, but they eat batteries like there is no tomorrow. Pixel Pals are a fantastic idea for adding throughout your collection because a lot of times shelves get pretty dark inside, and if you just pop this in the back corner of one, you can help to light that shelf but also create a little pop of color inside of there. But there are other figures outside of the Pixel Pals. There are also these other figures from Nintendo, like this Boo or this Heart. And this Heart, personally, I really have a really good spot for it being inside of this shelf. I found a nice little location where it will reflect a lot of that red light from it, and it really pops in that location. And another thing that I have for lighting is I have this PVM monitor that I have connected to my NES, and I will light this thing up, especially when I'm making videos. It really makes that area pop in that shelf that I've gotten from IKEA, and it looks fantastic. I really like having that screen to kind of light up there and really generally make that area look awesome. It's a fantastic spot to have a PVM or a small monitor is inside of one of these shelves, and just kind of have it floating inside of it. It really fills the space, as well as it's just a great place for me and my son to play some NES games. But one of my favorite ways to use light in a game collection to make things pop is by putting the lit thing behind some stuff that is see-through. And I did that with my Pixel Pals Mario that I have here on my shelf, and I put it behind this other case that I use for Super Nintendo games. And it just looks really cool looking through that case to see that Pixel Pal back there. I kind of put it halfway in, halfway out, so I can see kind of half that Pixel Pal on the outside of the case, and then the rest of it I see visually throughout it. And of course, the other bonus of having a lit object behind some acrylic is that the acrylic acts as a way of scattering that light. So the edges of the acrylic kind of light up, and they look really cool at night. It's just a nice place to be in, very relaxed at nighttime to be playing some games. And as we were just talking about how I was using that Pixel Pal figure behind the acrylic case, that creates a lot of depth in an area, and that's a great way to add a ton of visual interest to a spot, is by using depth. Depth is one of those things that goes back in art history for a very long period of time. Having a foreground, middle ground, and background is very imperative if you want to create a really nice scene. So when you're setting up your game collection, having things in the front and in the very back can really add a lot of depth to that and make a really nice environment for your games, and it will look really awesome. A lot of people already do this without even thinking about it. They'll put amiibo in the front, and they'll put some cards that they got in the back, and then they'll have their games in the middle, and that's just another way of generating a little bit of depth. And I would definitely encourage people to look at the different items in their collection and look at them in a different kind of way of which they can create some depth from them. Especially if you're not using some items, you could certainly put them in the back side of a shelf and then use them for a little bit of background on an item. A couple of the different ways that I like to generate some depth in my own game collection is by putting these controllers out in front of all of these Game Boy games that are in this stand that I got from DNA Dimension Designs, and it ends up looking really cool. It's nice to have those controllers out front. I put them on kind of a rakish 45-degree angle so that I can see them perfectly from the couch, and it makes just for an awesome, really in-depth scene. Another location that I like to use depth was with these pop figures. I had this space and I didn't know quite what to do with it, and then I had these 3 different pop figures, so I decided to pop them in there, and they looked pretty awesome. But looking back into the shelf, I saw that there was all this space that wasn't used up, So I decided to get these little Nintendo figures that I've had for some time. They're kind of flat and very pixelated looking, and they were a perfect fit for putting way back there in the background. Since I put them so far back in the shelf, they kind of get shaded out, and you can just see the outlines of all of those when you're looking directly into the shelf. And it just adds a ton of different depth and just a really cool visual area to look at. And one of the things to think about with those last two items I talked about is that it's not that many items that I'm putting there, but it makes it look really cool to just kind of rearrange them in a certain way. And another little way of creating a little bit of depth in a game collection is by putting items on an angle. If you put things on a 45-degree angle, you're going to have foreground and background automatically, because part of that item is going to be closer to you and part of it will be much further away. And that will create a little bit of depth and just a little bit of visual interest when you're looking at those games. And then the last way that I really like adding some depth to my game collection is by using these inserts that I got from IKEA. I can't say enough about these things. They create all sorts of different depth and color changes to the environment and make for a really awesome setup. And speaking of inserts, another way to really add visual interest to your space is by breaking up the space. Now when I'm talking about breaking up the space, one of my favorite shelves growing up was always these knick-knack shelves where every single box was perfectly fit for the item that was inside of it. And these made for a really cool, whimsical, awesome shelf, but they also felt really organized. So it was very eclectic yet organized, and that always really interested me. I love having that and instituting it in my own game collection. So whenever I find a way to kind of break up a shelf or make it look like there's a box that was designated for an item, I kind of jump at the chance. One of the easiest ways to do this is by adding a vertical shelf to any of your bookcases. I took one of the shelves off of a smaller IKEA bookcase that I had, and it's actually the perfect size to go vertically and also fill it from the front to the back. And it looks fantastic. It helps divide up the space, and I have my Sonic Media Special Edition kind of all outlined with shelves that look like they were meant to be there. So simply by adding a vertical board into these shelves that you painted the same color as your shelves might be a great solution to kind of break up those spaces. And then on this topic about breaking up your space, I also got a question from Sean over at Cartridge Club, who asked about breaking up the space in one of the Kallax IKEA shelves. And after researching the idea and trying to find different resources for it, I found an idea where somebody had taken foam core board and cut it up to a size that would fit into the back of the shelf. And this allows you to put the games on top of it and then put some down lower in front of it, really breaking up the space and giving everything its own level, as well as giving you more room within that shelf to work with. But the foam core idea doesn't have to stop there. I ended up using this foam core idea all throughout my own collection, and it helped me to divide up different spaces. Another problem that's easily solved by this idea is by using this foam core board essentially like bookends. I took the foam core and kind of cut it up into a perfect shape so that I could put some games on the right side of a shelf, but also have my vinyl and gaming vinyl collection on the left side of the shelf, and I could have that easily accessible for my record player that was on top of that shelf. I actually really like this idea, and I kind of want to take this foam core outline and then turn it into real boards in the future to make this more permanent. But it works really good and it's super strong, so it'll last a very long time until I decide to do that. But this idea gets really crazy and you can get super creative with it and make all sorts of different stands and ideas just with a razor blade, some hot glue, and some 1/2-inch foam core board. And it's just really awesome. And next up is contrast. Contrast is one of those things that as game collectors we kind of struggle against, because there are so many different colors in the industry that they all get kind of mixed together and become kind of this blob on the wall when we mix all our games together. When it comes to contrast, you're going to be kind of limited when it comes to your video games on what you can do. It really is going to depend on what color shelving you ended up with. I chose white, and that allows me to make a lot of different things pop outside of the actual white items, which will kind of blend in, as you can see with the Wii games I have on the shelf behind me. A light colored figure might be a perfect solution for a dark colored shelf, or having a dark colored figure on a white colored shelf might be an awesome solution as well. And both those are going to create some really cool contrast in an area that's just visually awesome. But it doesn't just have to be figures that you're putting in front of light or dark things. Even my PVM was a very dark black case, and having this, I wasn't quite sure where to put it, but after getting these IKEA shelves, I slid it into them, and it made for a nice kind of dark spot amidst all of this really bright area. But outside of light versus dark or different colors to contrast each other, there's also things like rough versus smooth, and that can be something that you think about when you're setting up your collection. If you have something super rough and you put it in front of a smooth item, it's going to make that item really pop. One of my favorite ideas for adding some contrast to a collection is by adding a living thing into that game collection. Fairly recently, I decided to pick up some of these little small plants from a craft store. and they looked really cool sitting on the shelf behind some of my games. And these are all fake plants, but they kind of look real, and I really like having them in there because they added a lot of life to the collection and just makes it feel much more comfortable. And then the last idea, and probably one of the more simple ideas for adding a little bit of visual interest to a game collection, is by putting your specialized items in the forefront of your collection. Now, when it comes to these specialized items, I'm more talking about the more visually specialized items. It could be a massive figure that you have from some game that you played recently, or it could be a really cool advertising item from a past game that came out. But these kinds of visual ideas can make for a really awesome location in a game collection. A lot of people might think that I'm talking about putting a rare game on the shelf or something in that way, but really that rare game is only going to look rare when you're up close with it. So having something that's really visually cool when you're sitting far away, but also up close, is awesome. Otherwise, that rare game will kind of blend into that shelf with the rest of the carts that it looks like. But if you do insist on putting your rare game out front of your collection, like a lot of people do, I do recommend putting it into an acrylic case, and that will add a little bit of more prominence to it, and more people are going to be looking at that. It will also catch the light and just look awesome. And while I'm on the topic of putting some of these specialized items out there, I think it's important for people to understand that if you do kind of mob your shelf and you kind of push all your amiibo or all your figures or even all your games into one small area, then you end up kind of meshing them all together, and you kind of lose a lot of the coolness of those figures in that pile. So generally speaking, it's not always possible, but even separating them a little bit will create a ton of visual interest in any one of those different figures that you have. I personally recommend putting just one big figure out there, or one of your awesome figures that you're really proud of out there. That'll create a little bit of visual interest along with all the rest of the items that were in this video. So overall, creating visual interest in your game collection can be done with a whole bunch of different things that you probably already have in your collection. You can even limit your collection and limit how many things you're putting on one shelf, and that can create a ton of visual interest just in itself. And the biggest thing about visual interest in a game collection is it allows you to kind of guide where people are going to be looking in your game collection. And you can kind of have them look at these little lit up areas that you've added, or these little textured areas, or these contrasting areas that you've created, and that will kind of guide them to look around your collection versus looking at a shelf of games where all the games are kind of perfectly aligned, just like the majority of different collections that are out there. You'll have all these little spots and places of interest for people to look around the collection, and that's really awesome. So thank you very much for coming and checking out the video today. I really appreciate you coming by and checking it out. If you have any other ideas for creating a little bit of visual interest in a game room or game collection, please let me know in the comments below. I am always looking for more ideas and looking to add more ideas to that playlist that I have. If you want to help out Discard Pass's subscription, please check out patreon.com/discard and check out all the awesome stuff you can get for $2 a month. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. But otherwise, have a great day and collect what you love.